do know what it creates is it creates a lack of the connection that we want, especially to our loved ones, by not being able to know how to start these hard conversations.
To reason with someone is to motivate them to do or accept topics, ideas, and issues through discussion and having conversations. This podcast is about the relationship with ourselves and the relationship with others, finding our stability in our self-worth, and how do we actually be in healthy relationships. We find this out through connection, compassion, and communication. Reach out, connect with me, like, subscribe, comment. I want to unpack whatever it is that we can to really get to the nitty and gritty of finding out how do we get better in ourselves and how do we get better in our relationship.
Hold up. Wait a minute. Something ain't right.
No.
Rough on him now.
No, he needs to know.
I just wanna feel real love, feel the home that I live. I still remember me before you. I just haven't met you yet.
3, 2, 1. Reason With Me podcast. All right, we're back. So if you're liking this podcast, can you please hold up, wait a minute, pause. Please give my podcast a review, give it some stars, leave a comment if you really feel inclined, and yeah, that'll just really help me. All right, let's keep going. All right, who we got? We have an entrepreneur, author, speaker, athlete, philanthropist, David Richman. David uses the lessons learned in his life to enrich and inspire others. As a former sedentary, overweight smoker, David knew that he needed to focus not on what others wanted out of him, but on what he wanted out of life. With his first book, Winning in the Middle of the Pack, David discussed how to get more out of ourselves than ever imagined. Now, David shares the interconnected stories of others overcoming obstacles, specifically cancer, in his second book, The Cycle of Lives. Hope you guys enjoy this podcast. I really enjoyed this podcast, really unpacking the mysteries of expressing emotions when we're going through cancer. His book is available and is raising funds for cancer research and care while sharing the stories of emotion and inspiration. All right, David Richman, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jackson. Very excited to talk to you.
I'm so intrigued to see where this is going to go. I'm super excited. So yeah, I guess let's just jump straight into it. Hey, who are you? What do you do? Tell me all about it.
Oh, yeah. Man, I was open-ended questions. Man, I could talk for the whole time, but no. I don't know. I guess who I am. I'm a dad. I have 24-year-old twins, beautiful wife. Life is good. I'm an endurance athlete. I do Ironmans and long bike rides and 100-mile runs. I guess around you, that'd be something like 140K runs, something like that.
Yeah.
Something like that. But I started off not doing that, right? I started off as like a overweight smoker, like not athletic, not living a good life, and finally just said, man, you gotta look at the guy in the mirror and start worrying about him. And I did that when my kids were very, very young, and it led me down a path of discovery, both about myself and also about the world. I write books, and recently came out with a book that delved into 15 people's emotional journeys with cancer. So I learned a ton of lessons early in my life. I just never applied them to myself. And then I figured when I started applying to myself, I started learning more. So I guess that's my story in a nutshell. We can take it from there.
Wow, there's so many places we can take it. So your book, Cycle of Lives, I believe
Yeah.
it's called. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, that's my latest book, and that was born out of, this thought that, people are really good about talking about kinda like the triage, the like, "Oh my gosh, I had something bad happen," in this case, it's like being diagnosed with cancer or having a loved one or a friend diagnosed with cancer. And people are really good about jumping in and saying, "Hey, how do I get time off work? How do I find the best doctor? How do I get on a special diet and reduce my stress and sleep better and get my kids watched while I go to the doctor?" They're really good about those kind of things. But what most people are not very good about is talking about the emotional side of it and talking about, how they feel about what they're going through. It's really difficult for people to talk about. And it's difficult for us to talk to them about. And um, I found that out when I was confronted with the fact that my sister was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. And, we had a lot of talks, Jackson, like a lot of deep emotional talks about things. And yeah, when we were done, I kind of noticed that was very unusual. People aren't really equipped to have those really hard conversations. And we kind of just like to avoid, like, oh, I don't want to say the wrong thing, or I don't want to make somebody feel bad, or whatever. And so I said, How can we try to maybe change the narrative a little bit and maybe help equip people to start those hard conversations?" So that's what I embarked on when I did this latest project.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it would have been really amazing for you. I want to touch on the book and the experiences
Mhm.
and like that. But what I'm really drawn back to is, I guess you were looking at how to fill your cup up externally for a long time, and then eventually sort of looked in the mirror and go, well, what do I need to do for me? And finding you, and obviously creating what you've been able to create, and then kind of give back. Like, what was that like? Like, it's not as easy and simple as it can be, or maybe it is as simple as it
Well,
can.
look, you're a professional, right? You know these things, right? It's not. It's very easy to look at somebody else or look at yourself from the third person perspective and live in denial or deflect to other things. And I kind of grew up in a really wacky household. My parents were nearly 40 years difference in age.
Right.
So my mom was 18 when she married my dad, who was 56. And so I grew up in a household where my mom was too young to have kids, probably didn't want them, and my dad was too old to have kids, probably didn't want them. And that led to a series of problems. But I kind of got into this pattern of fixing problems and getting myself out of holes that I was thrown into or that I dug for myself. And I kind of went through maybe the first few decades of my life with a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. Like I had to be the guy to fix everything. And I was looking for people's approval rather than like feeling good about myself.
Mm.
It probably stemmed from my childhood, never having obtained anybody's approval or love or whatever. So I went on this quest of like finding the biggest problems that I could find and then figuring out like, oh, I'm a good guy because I can solve these problems, or I can make somebody really angry love me or something, like which is not possible, right? So one day I found myself in an abusive relationship. My ex-wife was a violent alcoholic, physically violent, emotionally violent, and I had 4-year-old twins. And I said, "Man, I got to get us out of here, and before something really bad happens." So I got us out, and I did that. I literally, like, no joke. I stood in front of the mirror and said, like, "All right, you're not stupid, and you're good at solving problems, but dude, like, you never one time worried about yourself. Like you need to figure out, like, where do you want to go? Who do you want to be?" And I just said, "Well, I don't want to be fat. I don't want to be a smoker. I don't want to be sitting on the couch doing nothing. I don't want to be fixing everybody else's problems. I want to start like living my life." And that's
Mm.
where it kind of started.
Yeah. And how incredible. Like, yeah, I mean, I resonate with it so much. I talk a lot about it in my therapy and with my clients and on this podcast about, really getting my needs met by meeting the needs of others and getting satisfaction from that, and how eventually that kind of doesn't fulfill us, and we end up getting out or getting resentment, and that's what happened for me. So I resonate with a lot of your story, being able to figure out where I'm going to get my worth from, like it was some treasure hunt that I had to
Yeah.
find accolades and different people to fix and add to my, a big old achievement list. But it was looking in the mirror and really going, what do I want for me? And
Yeah.
man,
It's a hard thing to do, right? Because it's not like you're doing something wrong by caring about others and taking care of them and trying to help them. You're not doing something wrong. It's a good thing, but eventually you got to go, wait a second, we're all just passerbyers in everybody's life. I got to live my own life.
mm,
And you wake up and you go, oh, who am I and where am I and where am I going to be? And
yeah,
what I had to do, and probably, again, you're a professional, you know this stuff more than I do. But what happens is the later in life that you start that realization that you should be living your own life and not for other people, the harder it is to do because you don't know who you are. You beat yourself up for making bad decisions and wasting time, right? You fall into bad habits and you just it's hard to do that. It's hard to do that. And it was it and I struggled with it because if you're a caretaker and now you're worrying about yourself, then you just think you're selfish and self-centered and it's like, well, wait a second, but that's the right thing to do, right? It's the right thing to do to be healthy for yourself so you can be your best person for other people. But we're not wired that way if we're out there fixing everybody else's problems. And
mm,
so, I have this a book participant in the book. Her name is Maggie. And I won't tell you her whole story, but her story will totally resonate with you, right? So she's very, very young. She's the oldest kid, and all she is expected to do is take care of her younger siblings, right? But she got no problem with that. It just comes natural to her. And then her grandmother gets cancer when she's a teenager, and she says to her parents, "Hey, can I move in and take care of grandma?" So she takes care of grandma till grandma dies. Another grandma gets cancer. "Hey, can I move in with grandma and take care of grandma?" She dies. Then she takes care of her mom. Her mom dies. A friend of hers from university gets shot, and she takes care of him. He dies shortly after. Then her dad, she's taking care of her dad, and then he dies. And then a friend, and it's like one thing after another. And I said to Maggie, I said, "Maggie, what are you going to do when there's nobody left to take care of?" And she goes, "Oh, there's always going to be somebody." And I go, "No, I mean, like, there's nobody left. Like, you're outliving everyone. What are you going to do?" And she's like, "I have no idea. Like, I don't know." And I said, "Maybe you're going to have to take care of yourself." And she goes, "Well, I wouldn't know how to do that." I'm like, wait a second. Right. So it's a very, very understandable syndrome.
yeah, yeah, and I think there's lots of different ways to describe it. I talk a lot about it as codependency, and really how it plays out in that way. And I get it gets to that point, and Maggie's a good example. We eventually light ourselves on fire to start keeping other people warm. We stop giving
Mhm.
them a jacket, we start giving them literally everything we got until we slowly burn and never look inward. So it's hard. You're right. I mean, you're running bloody Ironmans coming down to Australia just to compete
All
crazy
right.
long events. But that's battling on the body. But I imagine a similar battle when you go, oh God, I've got to look after me instead of everybody else. It's just as much turmoil and sweat and hard work. I really I really see it like that.
Yeah, but it's also somewhat selfish too, right? Because it takes time away from friends and family. It's focusing on, oh, sorry, I can't hang out with you today. I got to go do a 6-hour bike ride or something. And it's like, so you have to choose, like, in order to take care of myself, I've got to let go of, like, if I got a house full of people I'm hosting, but I got to do a 2-hour run before I would, not that I would ever run when I was an overweight smoker, but I mean, to walk away from a house full of people that I'm hosting to go run for 2 hours because it's what I need to do,
Mm,
that's, like, foreign to me, man. That's really impossible because it's like, oh, it's so self-centered, it's so selfish,
mm,
I gotta be the one to be in charge and, like that. But then I go, no, I got to take care of myself, because if I'm not my best self for me, how am I going to be my best self for anybody else? I mean, authentically,
Right.
like truthfully.
True, yeah, and that's so genuine, right? I think that that whole process is is such an up and down thing, or it was for me, and I know that it is for so many others. And I think coming back to that, if I don't do it for me, I'm actually not going to be able to do it for anybody.
Right.
It's selflessly selfish because, and this is the little slip away that I get for a lot of my clients. It's like, if you actually, this is the secret, if you look after yourself, you actually be able to look after some
Yeah.
others a little bit longer. But it's all got to be in moderation and in a healthy way. But that's the key. You have to stop and go, oh, I'm going to put some boundaries in place, make some time for me for a while. Then I'll come back
Yeah.
to doing it better.
And I know you've talked about this before, and it's like the language that we use when we're talking to ourselves. And I used to think that I would normally think that that's being self-centered, right?
Exactly.
But it's not. What it is it's being self-caring. And there's a big difference between being self-centered and being self-caring, right? So when I am cooking dinner for a house full of people, and I'm taking charge, I'm actually being self-centered, because I'm like, oh, I'm the guy that needs to like be in charge, and I'm taking care of it. And it's a little bit selfish and maybe a little bit not so friendly, because other people want to help, and maybe I don't want them to help because I want to be in charge and I want to take care of stuff. I feel like that's being self-centered. But self-caring is like, you know what? I got to let people in. I got to let them help take care of me. I got to let them take some of the power of hosting. I got to let them be a part of it, because that's caring for myself and who I really authentically am, right? I don't need to be the guy fixing everything, right? Other people can fix their own stuff. They can even help me, And so a big change in mindset, especially for me, it came out of trauma, because when I left home at 18, I was robbed at gunpoint. I was homeless. I didn't have anybody to call, and I made it to running $100 million in revenue business for a major Wall Street firm, having not gone to college, right? So imagine going from nothing to something. You can imagine what kind of chip I might have had on my shoulder about I got to be the one in charge of everything.
Yeah. Yeah, the better than doesn't mean we're, it's if we look at why we feel less than or we feel better than, they're both still self-esteem issues, right? They're both
Hmm.
problems that we have within ourselves because we're still, you know, we still got to find it elsewhere rather than within. So
Yeah, so I wrote this first book, or a different book, not an industry book, but my first kind of book for the public was a book called Winning in the Middle of the Pack. And I came up with this concept of, when you're in the middle of pack, like you go out to a road race, or you go out to a triathlon or something like that. Everybody's watching those pros at the front, and everybody's watching who's going to finish over the line last, right? Oh, who's going to be the last one to make it in? But in between, nobody cares. Like, nobody's watching, nobody cares. And that's beautiful, because if you're the person that's trying to be in the, I'm never going to win a race. I'm never going to be last. I'm never going to win a race. I'm always going to be somewhere in the middle, but I'm not doing it for anybody else. And so, that's the beauty of being in the middle of the pack, is the only person that cares is you. The only person that's watching is you. So if you don't do your best, you're always going to know nobody really cares. And it's really awesome, because then you're doing it because it's what you really want to do, and because you care, right?
yeah,
So you could win just because you gave it your best, and that you were proud of yourself, and you gave it some kind of effort, and build your own self-esteem just because you care about the dude looking in the mirror. And
mm,
that's a it's a really different mindset. It took me a long time to get there, you know?
yeah, and I think it's ongoing, right? There's always a little inner critic that comes and goes, and I guess the more we work on ourselves, the better we are at silencing or managing them a bit more. That guy that comes like, "Hey, remember we used to think this all the time," and
Yeah,
you're trying to fight us.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, and it is. I love that winning from the middle of the pack. It means that you're just doing you. So
mhm,
that's beautiful. If I can wake up in the morning and go, if I just spend the whole day by myself and I didn't have to please or prove or look for anything else externally, and just would I be okay?
yeah,
Would I be lovable and enough for me? And yeah, I try to get that and think about that, reflect on it really regularly. So you found your way, and that's beautiful. And I guess that would have, in your exploring in your new book,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess seeing where different people sit on that spectrum, and I guess a big access to that being, or where do they sit with their emotions. It's very hard to know who you are and what your truth is when you can't access the ability to connect in an emotional way. You can try, but you might not get too far. So I'm super intrigued. I've
Mm-hmm.
read a lot about the consequences of not processing some of the stuff that can happen to us, and the worth that we feel, and the language that we have towards ourselves manifests in different ways, and sometimes that can be cancer. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and in some of the stories that you had with the
Mm-hmm.
book, in that emotional space and connection to
Yeah,
that.
sure. Well, listen, Jackson, those are very profound thoughts, and I don't know. I'm sure that there's going to be people that know the answer to this question or think they do know the answer. I don't know what holding stress inside creates. I don't know if that creates cancer. I don't know if it cures cancer. I don't know if it makes you stronger, if it makes you weaker. I don't know about those things. Okay. I just don't. I'm not medically qualified. I don't have very strong feelings on it one way or another. What I do know, though, is that when it comes to trauma, especially things that we kind of can't wrap our brains around, it's easy to just shut off the part in our brain that says, "Man, I don't wanna deal with this. Or I can't deal with it, or I don't know how to deal with it, so I'm not even gonna try." And then we walk away, figuratively or not. But
Yeah.
and what I do know that creates the lack of connection we want in life. And I'll tell you an example of this, and I'm sure anybody listening can totally relate to this, okay? So I'm on this super long bike ride. Okay, it's nearly 5,000 miles, so it's some 8,000 kilometers bike ride, solo bike ride across the country. Okay, and I'm riding my bike solo to try to meet all the people I have been talking to for a couple of years because I wanted to meet them in person for the first time. And I'm in this city about 1,500 miles from the start, about 2,200K from the start, something like that. And my friend says, "Hey, brother, my whole family's here. They love what you do. My dad went through cancer like 20 years ago. My sister went through cancer like 6 or 8 years ago, and everybody's been touched by it. And we'd love to thank you for what you're doing and bringing awareness to the emotional side of this thing. We all want to buy you brunch." I said, "All right." So the dad pulls me over. He's like this 80-year-old guy, and he's old school. And he's like, what you're doing, telling people about to deal with their emotions with this whole cancer thing. It's like so great. And I'm so proud of you. And it's such an important part. And I'm like, going, wow, this is cool. And then his daughter, my friend's sister, pulls me over and she says, I had breast cancer. I had stage 3, double mastectomy. I was a nurse at the time, but I left to become a lobbyist for patient rights in oncology because I was so touched by it. And this thing that you're doing, talking about the emotions of cancer, it's so important. And I said, that's great. So at the end of the brunch, I'm getting ready to say, a word to the group. And I said to them, I go, not every family is like you guys, right? I mean, the fact that you're so open about talking about the emotions. And I look over at the dad and he's got his hands in his lap and he's looking down, and I look over at the daughter, my friend's sister, and she's got her hands in her lap. And I go, "You guys do talk about the emotional side of what you've been through, right? And you both just thanked me for what I'm doing and how important it is." And the dad goes, "Well, I'm old school. I didn't want to burden my daughter. I didn't want to bring my family down. You're just a man. You go through what you go through, and you just deal with it." And I look at the daughter and I go, "You?" And she goes, "Listen, man, I mean, I don't know what my dad really went through, but I thought I might die. How am I gonna talk to my dad about maybe he's gonna lose a daughter? And how am I gonna make him feel bad about what he went through?" So no, he like never talked about it. I go, "But you both said how important it is." And they go, "It is." And I go, "Yeah, but you haven't done it." And they go,
Yeah.
"Well, that's what your book's gonna do. It's gonna help us." And I'm like, oh my goodness.
No
It's
pressure.
right. Even if you know how important it is. And so to cut to the chase on that story, about 3 weeks later, I'm still on my bike ride, and you know, I'm way further along, and I get a call from my friend Jerry, and he said, "Brother," he says, "you're never gonna believe it. I just went to dinner with my dad and my sister." And I said, "Oh, that's cool." He goes, "Yeah, they talked for like an hour and a half. They were laughing and they were crying." And he goes, "I just sat back and watched them because they're so close anyway, but I never heard them talk about their cancer." He goes, "On that, like that emotional level," he goes, "it was unbelievable." He says, "And I can't tell you how much I appreciate it." And I'm like, "Oh man." So we know what we got to do sometimes, but it's hard to do. So I do know, long answer, and I'm sorry for rambling a little bit, but I do know what it creates is it creates a lack of the connection that we want, especially to our loved ones, by not being able to know how to start these hard conversations.
Mm, mm. Thank you so much, David. It's incredible. Awareness is like this two-way mirror. We're on one side, and the other one of us is sitting down getting interviewed. And we're like banging on the door, like, "Don't forget this!" Like we're yelling at awareness. Well, yelling at ourselves. And if we're not listening to awareness, it's nothing. We're not going to do anything with it. We might be double banging on the door, being like,
Right.
"Remember emotions," So I think
Yeah.
that we've got to put into action. And I love that they came up to you like, "This is the best." It's too late for us, but
Right.
you're doing what you're doing. Wow.
Yeah, and that was kind of one of the common themes, right? And I interviewed not just people that had cancer, but I interviewed loved ones. I interviewed caregivers, an oncologist, a 40-year oncologist, talked to her about her emotional journey of caring for patients over a 40-year period. I talked to a medical health professional, a pediatric oncology nurse, and I talked to all of them about their emotional journeys with cancer as it related to the childhood and young adult traumas that they had in life. So traumas that I couldn't identify. I mean, I lost my sister to cancer, but I couldn't identify what it was like to go through cancer or to lose a spouse or something like that. Um, I could understand kind of like a little bit about abuse, about addiction, about being in abusive relationships, about making bad decisions, about being dealt a bad hand in life. Those kind of traumas I could kind of wrap my brain around and identify with. But how did those things affect people's ability, or more likely their inability, to form more meaningful connections with people? Because, if I were to call you up, Jackson, and you go, "Hey, what's happening, David? How was your day?" And I'm like, "Oh, dude, at work, it was really tough, man. One of my coworkers, their son, little 4-year-old kid has brain cancer. What the hell am I going to say to him?" Like, what do you say? Right? It's so freaking hard. So the best thing to do is kind of avoid them and not say anything, because you don't "Oh, I'm sorry," or "Geez, can I bring you a casserole," or something. But I mean, how do you navigate that trauma in order to form a more meaningful connection? It's so hard.
Yeah. And that it is, all right. And to step into it is a whole nother thing, like you said, with this family. They're sort of, it's almost like you gave them permission or gave them a little check to go, well, I mean, you can start, and then we just do it. If we think we need all the step by step process to just showing up and then doing it, then we're all going to avoid it, right? So I think that's
Mm,
that's so super super true, and our experiences shape that, right? Like you said, with our traumas, you can't teach what you don't know, right? So if
yeah,
our parents didn't know how to deal with emotions, they're not going to teach them to us, you know.
absolutely.
Uh,
Absolutely.
and then we might have learned them in a really negative way.
And,
Um,
and let me just interrupt you for 1 second, Jackson, because we also can't teach ourselves if we haven't done it. And so I knew that going in, as I wasn't looking for people to give me a prescription, and I wasn't looking for them to figure out how to fix themselves or ask me how to fix them. I mean, I'm not qualified to fix them, but you know what I'm saying? There was not that. What I
mm,
asked them to do was to really let me go through navigating the hallways of their journey
mm,
and telling me their story. Because by telling me their story, just what you were saying, they would learn. And by learning, now they could teach.
yeah, 100%. And then it's like riding a bike. It's like they start doing it and they're like, wait a minute, I'm doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the doorways is just beautiful, you know. People get to decide if they're going to open the doors along the hallways. There's, there's a little bit of grief here, there's a little pain here, and I'll let you see me in that. But you know, I get to decide how much I open it,
Mhm.
close, and but if I'm not given the opportunity, you just walk through my hallway, and you know, um,
Right.
it's beautiful that you can go and do that. And how many were you able to sort of like touch and meet and
Yeah.
share?
Well, there were many, to your point, there were many that weren't able to open up those doorways, right?
Yeah.
So either we went to places where they weren't able to go, and I didn't want, and I needed to go there because I wanted to tell true, authentic,
Yeah.
really moving, inspirational, evocative stories that would really help make an impact on people so that they could be better equipped to apply these stories to their own life and maybe learn a lesson or two
Mm.
about how to connect with people, right? So sometimes they weren't able to open up those doorways. Sometimes I wasn't skilled enough to figure out how to unlock the doors. So I talked to quite a few people who it didn't work out. But when I got to, the 15 that made it into the book, they were diverse in age, types of cancer, types of traumas that they had. Um, one person was just afraid of cancer. Another person had cancer 5 different times in their adult life, 5 different cancers, 5 different times. And so I had a really diverse range of people who were very, very open to learning what we were going to find out. And that was a couple of things that were common. One was every single one of them in the beginning said, my story's not that interesting. Nobody really cares. Right. First, and then you start talking to them and you realize it's like the most interesting story you've ever heard. Right. So, but people are just living their lives. They don't know. And then the other thing that people were, of these people that were where we were able to go where we needed to go, they were all like, okay, we're in this together. Let's see what we find out,
Yeah.
you know, which is wonderful. And we found out a lot about what were their limiters, to being able to process these emotions. What were the things that they were able to lean on that allowed them to? What were they safe to tell us that we could learn that they wouldn't have told us otherwise? Like, for example, I had one. I won't tell you the whole story because it's kind of long, but one person lost their spouse, and it was really, really brutal. They had just married. He had found the love of his life, and within 18 months, they were married, and she passed away. Absolutely, completely tragic. But they navigated her death 100% fully as much as they could ahead of time, right? As much as they could. And um, when she died, it was still hard, but he had processed all the emotions. They had processed them together. So what he did is he had lots of friends who would say to him, "Oh, I'm sorry," and they would look at him with these sad eyes, and they would make him feel like, "Oh, you should be in this point of grief." And he was grieving, but he had long processed everything. But he couldn't tell people, "Hey, don't look at me with sad eyes. Don't feel sympathy for me," because that's kind of mean to say to somebody who cared. They want to. So he had to like literally fly out of the town on the weekends so he could just be himself and not have people judge him and have sympathy for him and feel bad for him and look down on him. Oh, you poor thing, you poor thing. He didn't feel a poor thing. He felt a poor thing when she was going through it, but he didn't feel such a poor thing now because they had processed it all.
Mhm.
Right. And so how do you tell somebody? Yeah, no, don't tell me you're sorry. I don't want to hear it. Right. Don't say poor me. I don't feel poor me anymore. And so we were able to uncover that and really have him vocalize it. And I think I told it in a way that made an impact on people. And like that's really hard to do. So how would you have done that otherwise? You can't look at somebody and say, "Don't care about me."
Yeah.
But it's like, hey, care about me in a different way, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the difference between sympathy and empathy, right?
Yeah.
That, you know, I feel sorry for you. So tomorrow,
Mhm.
patronizing, but yeah,
Yeah.
because people just don't know how. Like, I'm sorry. You're sorry for what? Like, it
Yeah.
was your fault. Did you do this? You know?
Right, but it's so easy to do, and honestly, Jackson, I hear professionals do it all the time, and I kinda cringe at it. Like, I'll talk to the doctor and, do a podcast or an interview or something, and they'll say, "Oh, so what got you into this?" And I say, "Well, kinda started when my sister was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer." And they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry." And I'm like, "You're like a professional. I don't think you should be saying you're sorry because it wasn't your fault."
Yeah.
I mean, it's nice,
Yeah.
right? But I'd
It-
rather you ask me like, "Oh my god, what was that like? Like, how was she?
mm,
How does that make you feel? How long ago?" Like, talk to me about it. Don't just tell me you're sorry and then walk away because that doesn't help either one of us. It helps extricate you from an uncomfortable situation, but that doesn't really and if we're trying to form a more meaningful connection, we need to stay present in that moment, not avoid it.
okay. I love that. I'll put you on the spot then. What would you like to hear? Because you and many others across all adversity, right? Not just cancer, like everything. When we go through real bad pain and grief, like I have my ideas, but yeah,
Yeah.
what land for you, David?
Well, I learned this along the way, right? I don't know the answer. I learned it from talking to people, but I learned that if you are truly listening and you truly care, even if you're just strangers in the passing moment, but you're present and you're authentic and you care, that you kind of can't really ask the wrong question, right? And asking a question allows them to know that you care and allows them to tell you. So, for example, I pulled up to a hotel one time. It was a 17-hour day of biking. Okay. I was biking for 17 hours, 156 miles, basically like 200 odd K in one day, 17 hours. Absolutely ridiculous. I pull into this hotel like 1 in the morning, and this woman comes out who's the front desk clerk, and she said, "Oh my God, we thought you were going to be here hours ago, and I stayed extra just so I could say hello to you. I'm so proud of you, and I wanted to meet you." And I said, "That's very sweet." And she goes, "Yeah, well, I just felt this urge because I lost my grandfather like 3 weeks ago to cancer." And the old me would have went, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," like, that must be hard. And then I would like go, like, "I'm really tired. Let's check me in and let me go to my room." But what I learned was I said, "Oh my gosh, no way. Like 3 weeks ago, it must still be pretty raw for you, right?" And she goes, "Oh my God, it's unbelievable." And I said, "And you stayed up just to say hello to me? I mean, that's really sweet of you." And she goes, "Well, I was hoping maybe I could talk to you about my grandfather." And "What was he like?" And she's like, "Oh my God." We had this great conversation. It was only like 10 minutes, but it was
Yeah.
this wonderful conversation where she knew that I wasn't just going to go, "Oh, I'm sorry," and walk away. But I asked her to tell me about her grandfather, and she got a chance to say, "Oh my God, like, I'm so glad that we were so close at the end of his life and blah, 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 blah." And I know that for me, a couple of years later, I still remember that conversation vividly. Our paths will never cross again, her and I. Maybe, possibly, she's going to remember that some stranger cared about that relationship that's gone in time, and her grandfather's a distant memory now to most people, right? That somebody cared to let her say how she felt about him,
Mm.
and that was a real, true human moment between two strangers, and so that I think is what I learned about that.
Yeah. Well, I think that it just comes back to this power of connection, right?
Hmm.
It's so it's difficult to navigate, but it can be so simple in just being available, showing
Hmm.
up present. And I love that. Like, tell me about him. It's such a different response to they're like, oh, okay. I wasn't
Yeah.
expecting that.
Oh, by the way, Jackson, how about this question? Were you close?
Yeah.
Because my wife's grandmother just passed away. And a few people said something like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And other people were like, "Oh my God, gosh, your grandmother, that must have been tough." And my wife is like, "Hell no, it wasn't tough. She was a mean cur. I did
Yeah.
not like," right? Like, right? What a great question. Were you
Check
close?
in, right? Super, touched,
Way better than, "Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that."
well, it's a
Right?
judgment, it's an assumption.
Yeah.
And, it's
Yeah.
not as helpful. Oh, I had such a good question before, and now I've forgotten.
I keep interrupting you. I'm sorry.
No, that's no. I like where this is going, so it's completely fine. Um, I I've been reading a lot about just how things show up in the body, and it's awesome to hear like the different ways it kind of did. Oh, I remember my question. Yes. Do you think after the people that you've spoken to that there was this common theme of the limits that people had access to those emotions? Like, was there an overarching commonality between the people that you spoke to? Does that make sense?
Yes, everyone was different, okay?
Yeah.
Obviously, different ages, different issues, different things they had to deal with.
Oh, yeah.
Each person had a realization going into it when they said, my story's not that interesting." As we got to it and they actually could vocalize their story, everybody realized their story was very interesting. And it made me realize that when we're going through life, we're just living our life. We don't think it's anything special. We're just doing what we need to do to get from one moment to the next. And what you think is tough for somebody is just that's what they're dealing with. So maybe it's not so tough for them. Right. So don't judge how they might react to it because you don't know. You're not living their life. So I thought it was really amazing that everybody came to a realization that once they were forced to, not no, I didn't tie them to a chair, but once they were forced to relive their story and tell their story, that they had to admit that their lives were pretty fascinating. And I thought that was awesome. That was one. The other thing that was common at different levels, but at some point it was common in every story, was that trauma, especially around something as difficult to talk about as cancer, was somewhat self-isolating. It was somewhat isolating. It was so much easier to not push other people to talk or not be pushed to talk yourself or
Mm.
not take a step to try to do it with other people. So it seemed like that self isolation was kind of a common theme, if um, if not abandonment, right? Sometimes you ask two friends for help and they disappear when you need it the most. That's abandonment, but it's also isolating, right? So that was a common theme, which is again what we're talking about, which is connection. It's the opposite of what we need in life, right? And so that was those were two of the most profound commonalities that I found.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense when you look at those two things as like they're minimizing and then you're rejecting or abandoning it or isolating from it all. Like those two things don't give you access to being able to connect and talk about your emotions, right? When
Mhm.
say that I'm not important or this story is not that great, and I go, well, this is my experience, and I'm not letting you in, or I'm, being pushed out by it. Yeah, that's not a recipe for safer, honest, open, heartfelt discussion, communication. That's
No, and not everyone was sitting there with a box of, tissues, right? It's
yeah.
not like it wasn't that. I'm not talking about being emotional. I'm saying talking about the emotional aspect of it. Could you imagine, and
Mm.
this is the beauty in some of the stories I uncovered. Could you imagine, being told no, let me say it the way you had to say it. Could you imagine telling your wife of 25 years as she woke up and you lean into her and you say, "Darling, I need to tell you something." And she says, "What?" And you say, "They're going to wheel you into surgery." And she says, "Huh?" And they say, "They've just found a grapefruit-sized tumor in your brain. You might not survive the surgery. And if you do, it's probably not going to be a very good outcome." And could you imagine her looking at you and crying tears of joy saying, "Thank you. Thank you so much for telling me that." Could you I couldn't imagine, I couldn't wrap my brain around that, right? And it's such a wonderful story because, the backstory to that is that this marriage that they had, which had survived the death of a child, raising 5 other children, going through the ups and downs that life gives you, the wife was losing her mind. She was becoming an angry, distant, miserable person. And as the months and years went on, it became worse and worse and worse, and so bad that she had to check herself into a mental institution because she knew in a moment of clarity that she was the problem, not their marriage and not him. She
Mm.
was the problem. She thought she was going crazy. And so she was willing to throw away 25 years of marriage and the relationship with her kids and be gone. And then as they took her in, they did medical tests on her. They found this tumor. And when he told her what he had to tell her, she said, "So it's not me. I'm not crazy."
Mm.
Like like she was so joyful to know that. And
Mm.
so you never know what people have gone through and what they're going through. And so um, I think having judgment or having a preconception about the way somebody should feel about something is not fair because we're not living their life, right? If you
Mm.
told me a story of, I just heard this thing and the woman was so happy and joyful, I'd be like, you know what, go to hell. I mean, that didn't happen, right? But no, you have to allow her to feel the joy that she felt in that noise because against what she thought it was, her reality, that was much better news.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And it's so true. How can we ever know unless we really start to understand ourselves to be able to understand how we connect and even get to those answers. So it's a huge, I guess, all those people that and anyone that's sort of had a chance to read your book's really privileged that you've sort of been able to do that. Because without what you've been able to do for you, you wouldn't have gotten what you got from these people.
Yeah.
They'd be talking to a disconnected um, guy that still hasn't
Mhm.
figured it out, right? But instead they get the Richman that is rich in himself. Right?
Well, look, I learned this from my journey going from kind of being unhealthy to being a little bit more healthy, right? And I don't mean just physically and emotionally, psychologically, everything, is that there's kind of three steps to that. The third step's the best one, but the first step is you have to be able to look in the mirror and make an honest, truthful assessment of who you are. It's
Mm,
very, very, very hard to do.
yeah.
Um, that's number 1. The number 2 step, I think, is you need to forgive yourself for not being where you thought you might be and making mistakes and for not doing the things that you could have done or for wasting time or for whatever else you need to forgive yourself, right? You are where you are. You know what you know when you know it. That's it. You gotta forgive it. You gotta move on. You gotta just say, "Okay, I'm here. I'm gonna forgive myself for not knowing what I'm gonna know tomorrow," right?
Mm,
And then the third step is once you have those 2 things, now you can learn. And I when I embarked on the Cycle of Lives project, I definitely knew who I was. I definitely forgave myself for not knowing what I didn't know at the time, right?
uh,
I didn't know I should care about myself. I didn't
yeah.
know a lot of these other things. And now I could go learn. And that's the beautiful thing is to not bring everything that you know about yourself to the table because it's just not fair. It's very close-minded.
Mhm, mhm,
And,
mhm.
and I love this idea of I don't know anything. Like I know a lot, but every day I'm going to learn something new. Every conversation I might learn something new. And if I think I know the answer to every question, what the hell am I doing? Just stay home and just die. Because if you already know the answer to every question, if you already know everything about yourself, what's the point?
Yeah. Well, you're not going to unlock anything else. It's
Yeah.
yeah, not a life I want to live. I learn something new every day.
Hmm.
Like my curiosity. You kept saying I'm a professional. I'm like, yeah, I haven't figured it out, but I'm still going. Something new every day, and that's I'm so grateful for that,
Yeah.
and others, and you being able to share like this. It's been amazing. Um, So you gave us some teases this whole time talking about what this book's gonna bring and unfold. I'm super keen to
Hmm.
yeah, get into that actually. Um how can people get in touch with you, or how can they bring themselves to find your books and more about
Sure. Well, I appreciate that. The one of the things that I wanted to do with this project was to raise awareness and kind of maybe perhaps give somebody a tool or two that they could add to their belt right? When they're trying to form deeper connections. The second thing I want to do is raise a little bit of money. So 100% of the proceeds of the book go to the charities that were picked by the people that are in the book. So those are listed on my website. They're listed in the book, but they're really good nonprofit cancer focused charities. And so 100% of the proceeds go to that. So the book is in regular form, here in the States where most of the world, most books are sold on Amazon. So, that's where most books are sold. Um, uh, uh, there's also the audiobook, which is awesome. The audiobook is incredible. I had 15 different professional voiceover actors, each read one of the chapters. So it's very moving. They're very, very good actors and they read the stories with such power. It's very, very moving. And the book is not depressing or too heavy. Each story, although not every one of them is talking about the happiest of endings or the happiest of circumstances, each one is very inspirational and very forward thinking, and so they're uplifting. But they can get the book. It's called Cycle of Lives. They can do it wherever books are sold, or go to my website in the States. That's cycleoflives.org, because we're a nonprofit. Um, and you can find out more there. And like I said, I think the audiobook is the way to go because it's easy to get on Audible. And yeah, the stories are told in a very powerful way.
Awesome. And I'll put some links up on my show notes and on my website when we put this on as well, just so people can
Mhm.
grab, have a look and get a little bit more. And yeah, I think we have, today we did sort of raise some awareness, and I've definitely taken a few things. And yeah, we got to get down and connect with our emotions in any way we can in a space with others. That I think is what I took away from today. So I really appreciate it, David. And man, keep doing what you're doing.
Well, you do the same. I'm going to. The cool thing is that if you're not trying to tell people stuff, like you're not giving them prescriptions, and
Yeah.
and you're not preaching to them, but you just want to go on a side by side. Let's see what we can learn together. Let's go through this together. It's a wonderful way to approach that connectivity. And I rarely give advice. I don't really ask for advice. I more say let's talk about it and see what we learn, see what we figure out. So I've appreciated doing that with you, and yeah, we got to do it again at some point.
Yeah, man, this is so good, and I completely aligned exactly with this podcast and who I am as a person.
Mhm.
I've figured it all out, so let's share and talk about it and learn together. That's the way.
Yeah. That's why we found each other, right?
Yeah, yeah, and thank God we did, and I'm so grateful we did this. So
Mhm.
cheers, man.
Yeah. Cheers to you. Thanks for the time, Jackson.
Thanks. That was a nice episode. I got a lot out of it. But we are back. Yes, I'm continuing with this. The Reason with Me Love Letters playlist. That's what I'm calling it. If you're enjoying these podcasts, maybe you enjoy some of this playlist. The idea is just to connect and get into your feelings and see if music can help you be in what might come up for you. So this one is Feel by Robbie Williams. I thought it is quite appropriate. You might have noticed it's in the intro now, and I love this song. It really hits home for me. And yeah, it's all about feeling real love. Enjoy. See you next time. If you want to find out more about how therapy can help you kick some goals, go check out findreasontherapy.com.au or the Find Reason Therapy Instagram page.